A good Hodesh! Welcome everybody, and a good Hodesh. We've just begun the Hebrew month of Shvat. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday evening? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Paula in the great Northwest with some snowflakes, I think. Is it cold? Is it snowing? It's kind of cold here in LA, but obviously we can't complain. I know parts of the country are so cold. May everybody be safe and warm. Bella in Florida, Shandora in the Bronx, Joseph in Massachusetts, Melissa in Great Neck Guy in Ohio, Paul in Chicago, Joe in the Inland Empire. Marjorie, shalom from Georgia. Oh, congratulations on putting the long-saved Wiebelfetzer to good use. Wiebelfetzer? I feel like I should know what a Wiebelfetzer is, but I don't know what you mean. But you'll let me know. And Aoife, shalom from Florida. Welcome, everybody. Wiebelfetzer, what is that? Susan Malden Stregak, first timer here. Welcome, Susan. Great to have you with us. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by Charles Shapiro, in honor of those and in memory of those murdered by Hamas. May their memories always be for a blessing. May those holy souls have a great elevation in the world of souls. We do not forget. And of course, I'm sure, Charles, you would also want us to remember those who are still in captivity. Please, God, may they soon be free. Charles, thank you for your beautiful and thoughtful dedication. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. What is a Wiebelfetzer? The doodad. Got it. I shared earlier on Facebook that there's a particular kind of joy that maybe not everybody can identify with. I'm calling, I just made up this word today, hortisfaction. You have stuff that you hold on to, that particular piece of wood, a good box, little doodads that end up in the tool drawer because someday they might be useful. And today, it was useful. I had to fix the medicine cabinet door wasn't staying closed in my bathroom because the house had shifted a little bit, and I just needed like a little plastic piece that would self-adhere to the latch inside that medicine cabinet, and I had it. I had the item. I don't even know what product it was associated with years ago when these little things ended up in my tool drawer. But it was exactly what I needed when I needed it. I had it. What a joy. The joys of the tool drawer, or the joys of the stuff in your garage that finally the day comes. You are holding it because you might need it, and then you do. What a joy. Wiebelfetzer, what a great word for that. Thank you. Okay. Our daf today is page 70 here in Tractate Bava, Kamma, the 21st volume of the... Now I've lost my number. I've been saying it every day. Is it 21st or 22nd volume of the Talmud? Somebody remind me. Too much digression, right? Too much digression. Okay, anyway, Tractate Bava, Kamma. We are on page 70, but we're going to pick it up near the bottom of page 69b. And we've been discussing this debate among the sages of if somebody steals something from you, right? So it's yours. You haven't despaired of losing it. So the thief has not legally acquired it, but it's not in your possession. So Rabbi Yochanan says the thief cannot consecrate it because it's not his. And you cannot consecrate it because it is no longer in your possession. But the sages brought a Mishna, the Gemara brought a Mishnah which says that the pious ones would perform this beautiful little action on behalf of people who might take grapes from their vineyard as they were walking by. Right? So somebody takes your grapes from your vineyard, even just picking a few because they were growing near the road. So that's stealing. It's very petty, very small theft, but it's stealing. The issue is, if that was a fourth-year vine, so those grapes cannot be eaten unless they're redeemed, either turned into money, and that money will be Meiser Sheni, that would be spent in Jerusalem when people go up to Jerusalem for a festival when the temple is standing, or you could take the grapes with you and eat them in Jerusalem, and that was the law of that vine. Now, people who are walking down the road past this vineyard and don't know that that's a fourth-year vine, so if they take those grapes, okay, it's bad that they took stolen grapes, but it's worse that they're eating consecrated grapes, grapes that are not permitted for personal use. So the pious ones would say that, well, if anybody took some grapes and I didn't know about it, I hereby redeem them, deconsecrate them. Whether you consecrate or deconsecrate is basically the same process. I'm de-sacralizing them or deconsecrating them on these coins that I'm turning into Meiser Sheni. And I'm doing that on behalf of the people who stole my grapes. And that's why these people are called the pious ones, who, even though somebody took something without permission from their vineyard, they're still saving those people from having come to transgress that important prohibition, right? So the point is that they are doing the act of consecration or deconsecration on something that is no longer in their possession. So that would seem to contradict Rabbi Yochanan's point that when somebody takes something from me, it's too late for me to consecrate it because it's not in my possession. Now, Abaye said, if Rabbi Yochanan had not said that the pious ones and Rabbi Dosa said the same thing, i.e. that their rulings are identical, I would say that the pious ones accept the opinion of Rabbi Dosa, but Rabbi Dosa does not accept the opinion of the pious ones. And Abaye explains, the pious ones accept the opinion of Rabbi Dosa for the following reason. And if the sages instituted an ordinance for the sake of a thief, to prevent him from eating unredeemed fourth-year grapes by allowing the owner of the vineyard to de-sacralize produce that is no longer in his possession, does it need to be said that they did so for the sake of innocent poor people, as Rabbi Dosa claimed? Right. So this is the idea that there are certain provisions in the Torah that are for the benefit of the poor. Right. So the peah, you're not allowed to harvest the corners of your field. And also, as you go through the field harvesting, and stuff just falls and does not, get into the harvester's basket, as it were, that those leavings, right, they're left. You leave that for the poor. You don't go meticulously through your field and get every single piece of grain out of it that you later sell and make money. What falls on the ground, you leave it on the ground so that the poor can come and gather it and they'll have what to eat. So there's certain laws about the corners of the field, about the leavings, and certain other measures as well that are for the benefit of the poor. But the poor don't necessarily understand all the ins and outs and nuances of that law for their benefit. So they might actually take something thinking it was left for the poor that wasn't left for the poor. And they would have violated a law. They would have actually transgressed by picking that and just stolen something that actually belongs to the owner. So, for the benefit of the poor, people did a similar thing. They say, I hereby, assign that to the poor, or I redeem that, or I tithe it. They're also eating untithed produce, so I'm going to tithe this on behalf of the poor, or I'm going to redeem it on behalf of the poor. The question was, were they doing that for what the poor will take, even though it's unauthorized for them, or for what the poor have already taken? If it was already taken, then that would match the same case we're talking about with Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can't consecrate something after it's no longer in your possession, or deconsecrate. And likewise here with the poor, if we're talking about what the poor have already taken, well, they took it, they stole it unknowingly. And if we deconsecrate it or we tithe it on their behalf, so then we're doing something, that is no longer in our possession, right? So the same case as what the thief took. But if it was what the poor will take, then it doesn't apply because it is in the possession of the owner of the field at the time that he undertakes that action. So what they're saying is there's a difference between what you do on behalf of the poor and what you would do on behalf of a thief. Right? So Rabbi Dosa does not accept the opinion of the Pious Ones, as he says it is for the sake of poor people that the sages instituted an ordinance. But the sages did not institute an ordinance for the sake of a thief. In line with the aforementioned principle, feed it to the wicked man and let him die. We're not going to pass special laws to protect the thief from the consequences of his transgression. Somebody who knows he's stealing. The poor didn't know they were stealing. In a similar vein, Rava said if Rabbi Yochanan had not said that the Pious Ones and Rabbi Dosa said the same thing, I would say that there is a fundamental difference between the cases of fourth-year produce and gleanings taken by the poor. As one could claim, who is the Tana that taught the ruling of the Pious Ones? It is Rabbi Meir. Now, doesn't Rabbi Meir say that second tithe is property belonging to the Most High, rather than the possession of the one who separated from his produce? Right? The second tithe, remember that in 4 out of the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, when the temple was standing, second tithe is something that you would use as what you're going to eat when you go on the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem for Passover, for Shavuos, for Sukkot. Or if it was unwieldy, let's say you grew watermelons, how many watermelons are you really going to carry with you? You can sell them for money, and then that money, that's Meiser Sheni. That's second tithe money, and you bind it up in your hand, right? You separate it from the rest of your money, and that money can only be used for, the food that you're going to eat while you're on the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem during the festival. So it's for your benefit, right? That money is what you're going to eat. Is it your money? You're only going to use it to feed yourself when you go on this pilgrimage festival. But it's restricted in the sense that you can't use it for anything else. So who owns that money? Do you own it, or does the Most High own it? Doesn't Rabbi Meir say that second tithe is property belonging to the Most High, rather than the possession of the one who separated it from his produce? And even so, with regard to redemption of the second tithe, the merciful one established it in his possession. As it is written concerning the second tithe, and if a man shall redeem any of his tithe, he shall add to it its fifth part. Right? You will add 20%. That means if you redeem it yourself. If you sell it to someone else, okay, then whatever the market will bear, that's the money that you got to use for second tithe. But since you might be tempted, when you are both the purchaser and seller of it, because you're turning it into money, and you might, we're always biased in our own favor so that we'll have more money in our pocket and not less. So if you are going to act as both the seller and the buyer for the redemption of second tithe, you have to add this 20% just to make sure that you don't stiff the Most High, as it were. So although, according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, second tithe does not belong to the owner of the produce from which it was separated, nevertheless, with regard to redemption, the merciful one does distinguish between a stranger and one who separated it from his produce, as the Torah refers to the second tithe as his tithe, and thereby decrees that he, the owner of the crop from which it is separated, can redeem it himself, but he has to add 1/5 to its value. But no one else has to do that. And this indicates that although second tithe produce is not in fact owned by the person, the Torah treats him as the owner of the produce. Now, with regard to a fourth-year vineyard as well, the sages derive many of its laws from a verbal analogy between second tithe and fourth-year fruit, based on the use of the word holy in the context of fourth-year fruit and holy in this context of second tithe. It is written here concerning fourth-year fruit trees, and in the fourth year, all its fruit shall be holy, for giving praise to the Lord. Leviticus 19:24. And it is written with regard to second tithe, and all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's, it is holy. Leviticus 27:30. So from this analogy it is derived, just as in the case of the terms holy that is written in connection to second tithe, even though it is property belonging to the Most High, with regard to redemption, the merciful one establishes it in the jurisdiction of the one who separated it. So too, in the context of the word holy that is written in connection to the fourth year vineyard, even though it is not his property as it belongs to the Most High, with regard to de-sacralizing, the merciful one establishes it in the vineyard owner's jurisdiction. So the effect of this determination is that even when the fruit is in his jurisdiction, it is not his property, and yet he is able to de-sacralize it. And due to that reason, the owner of the vineyard is able to de-sacralize the fruit even after the thief has taken it. That's how this is relevant to our discussion. Even in normal circumstances, when one desacralizes his fourth year fruit, he is desacralizing fruit that does not belong to him. Consequently, there is no novelty in the ruling that one can desacralize fruit even after it has been taken by a thief. But with regard to gleanings for the poor, since the extra sheaves that the poor people inadvertently take are the property of the owner of the field, it may be claimed that only when those sheaves are in his possession, i.e., that they have not been taken by anyone else, can he relinquish his ownership of them. Whereas when they are no longer in his possession, he cannot relinquish his ownership of them. Consequently, the pious ones who permitted redemption of fourth year produce after it had been stolen would not necessarily agree with Rabbi Dosa, who allowed the relinquishment of stolen sheaves for the poor. So in a similar vein, Ravina said, if Rabbi Yochanan had not said that the pious ones and Rabbi Dosa said the same thing, I would say, who is the Tana who taught the opinion of the pious ones? It is Rabbi Dosa. I would have said this is so that an unattributed Mishnah should not present a difficulty to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And the reason why this would have resolved the difficulty is that Rabbi Yochanan did not say to apply his principle that the law is always in accordance with an unattributed Mishnah, which is the Mishnah that says about the pious ones desacralizing their fourth year fruit after it had been stolen for the benefit of the people who took it, and that was stated in an unattributed Mishnah, and therefore it's the law. And Rabbi Yochanan said that an unattributed Mishnah is the law. But it's also Rabbi Yochanan who said you cannot consecrate or deconsecrate something when it's not in your possession after a thief took it. So it seems like Rabbi Yochanan has two rulings that contradict each other. That's the problem that we're dealing with here. Now, I would have said this is so that an unattributed Mishnah should not present a difficulty to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And the reason why this would have resolved the difficulty is that Rabbi Yochanan did not say to apply his principle that the law is always in accordance with an unattributed Mishnah in a case where the Mishnah expresses the opinion of an individual sage. According to this interpretation, Rabbi Yochanan does not rule in accordance with the Mishnah due to the fact that it represents the opinion of an individual sage, Rabbi Dosa. So even though it's unattributed, we can match it up with Rabbi Dosa. So rather, he follows the majority opinion. And yet now that Rabbi Yochanan said that the pious ones and Rabbi Dosa said the same thing, it cannot be claimed that they are one and the same sage. And consequently, the ruling of the Mishnah is evidently accepted by at least two sages, and therefore the difficulty for the Mishnah, from the Mishnah, cannot be resolved by assigning it to a single sage. We are on page 70a now, and the sages of Nehardea say, one cannot write a document of authorization, known as an arachta, to assign another person to collect a debt or deposit of movable property on his behalf. And Rav Ashi said to a Maimar, and what is the reason for this law? And a Maimar said to him, it is due to the principle stated by Rabbi Yochanan. As Rabbi Yochanan says, if one stole an item and the owners have not yet despaired of recovering it, neither of them is able to consecrate it. This one, the thief cannot consecrate the item because it does not belong to him. And that one, the owner cannot consecrate it because it is not in his possession. So the granting of authority to collect a debt involves the transfer of ownership of the item or money from the owner to the collector, right? It's not that he's functioning as your agent. It's that you have assigned the debt to him. And that's different, right? You're transferring the ownership of the money that is represented by the debt to this person. That's what you can send an agent to collect the debt for you, but you can't transfer the debt to this other person so that he can collect it. And the granting of authority to collect the debt involves the transfer of ownership of the item or money from the owner to the collector. Otherwise, the debtor could refuse to convey it to the collector. So in the case of movable property, as it is being held by another, it is not in the possession of the owner. Just as the owner cannot consecrate this item, he cannot transfer ownership of it. He can't transfer ownership of it because it is not in his possession. There are those who state a different version of this law. The sages of Nehardea say one cannot write a document of authorization for the collection of movable property that the bailee or debtor has denied owing. And the Gemara infers, so according to this version, the only reason the document cannot be written is that the bailee or the debtor has denied owing the item to the principal, as a document written under these circumstances has the appearance of falsehood, since the purported owner is transferring ownership of an item over which his own ownership is in doubt. But it can be inferred that if the bailee or the debtor did not deny owing the item, then one can write such a document of authorization. And the sages of Nehardea state another halacha, another law with regard to this kind of document. A document of authorization, a document of authorization in which it is not written, go and take legal action against so-and-so and take possession of the owed property and collect it from him for yourself, has no substance, right? Unless that language, that formula is in it, the document has no substance. It is not a valid document. And what is the reason for this? It is because the other party, the bailee or the debtor, can say to the collector who presents a document without this clause, well, I am not legally answerable to you. I am willing to deal only with the person to whom the item is owed. So to avoid this situation, the authorization document must transfer actual ownership of the item to the collector who is now claiming it for himself, right? And this would contradict the initial statement that you cannot write such a document because it's not in your possession. Abaye said, and if it is written in the document that the owner transferred ownership of only half of the item to the collector, or a third, or a quarter of it, this is sufficient. And the reason is that since the bailee or the debtor must relate to the judgment, i.e. engage in litigation with the collector over the half or the third or the quarter of the item that has been transferred to the collector, he must relate to the judgment concerning all of it. And a Maimar said, if the collector who is empowered by the authorization seized the item, he collected and kept it for himself, so then the court does not take it away from him, as the owner transferred ownership of the item to him in the document of authorization, as explained above. Rav Ashi disagreed with the Maimar and said, since the owner wrote to the collector, I accept upon myself anything that develops as a result of this legal process, he has in effect rendered the collector an agent to act on his behalf, and therefore the agent cannot seize the item for himself. And there is another opinion that states the owner renders the collector a partner in the collected item, transferring ownership of half of it to him while maintaining ownership of the other half. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between this opinion and that of Rav Ashi? And the Gemara answers, the difference is whether the collector has the power to seize half of the collected item for himself. If he is merely an agent of the owner, he cannot seize anything. If he is a partner, he can seize up to half. And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that the owner renders the collector his agent. And therefore, this agent may not seize any portion of the collected item for himself. That's actually a digression from Mishnah number 1, which is all about when do we pay the twofold or the fourfold or the fivefold payment in a case of theft. But with that, what we just learned, that little digression, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 1. And now we open, finally, Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 7. Excuse me. Okay. The Mishnah lists a series of cases in which the thief is required to pay the fourfold or fivefold penalty. If one stole an animal as established based on the testimony of two witnesses, and he subsequently slaughtered the animal or sold it, also based on the testimony of the same witnesses, or based on the testimony of two new witnesses, in this case, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment, right? So remember that if the guy comes forward, I believe, and confesses that he's done this, stole it, and then, sold it or slaughtered it, but he confesses, then I don't know that he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. It has to be established against him by witnesses. So now what we're learning is it doesn't have to be the same pair of witnesses who witnessed the theft as those who witnessed the second element that triggers the fourfold or fivefold payment for a sheep or an ox, namely that he slaughtered or sold the sheep or the ox. So that can be a different set of witnesses. Now, a different nuance to this. If one stole an animal and sold it on Shabbos, or if he stole it and sold it for the purpose of avodah zarah, idol worship, or if he stole it and he slaughtered it on Yom Kippur. Now, obviously, he stole, that's a transgression, and then selling the stolen item or slaughtering the stolen item is another transgression. And now we're adding on top of that the selling or the slaughtering triggers an additional transgression because it was done on Shabbos or Yom Kippur when those things are prohibited. So, although his sale or slaughter in these circumstances involved a sin, he is not liable to receive the death penalty for the sale and must consequently pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. Right? In other words, if you slaughtered an animal under circumstances which would render you liable to the death penalty, then you wouldn't have to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment because you'd be executed, right? And we have a principle that when two penalties apply, only the bigger one holds. You don't do both, right? It's not like American jurisprudence where, you might be liable to the death penalty and, to pay a huge fine, to the government. It's one or the other, right? So if you're liable to the death penalty, then you're not going to have to pay the fine. If one stole an animal of his father's and then slaughtered it or sold it, and afterward his father died, and he inherited his father's estate, either on his own or in partnership with his brothers, or if he stole an animal and slaughtered it, and afterward he consecrated it, he still pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. In the case of one who stole an animal and slaughtered it, not for the purpose of eating its meat, but to use it for medicinal purposes, or to feed the meat to dogs, and likewise a thief who slaughters the animal to eat its meat, but it was found to be a treifa, an animal that was not kosher because it would have died anyway, or a thief who slaughters a non-sacred animal in the temple courtyard. In all these cases, he nonetheless pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. Rabbi Shimon exempts the thief from the fourfold or fivefold payment in these last two cases, as he maintains that the legal status of an act of slaughter that is not fit for accomplishing its full ritual purposes is not considered an act of slaughter. And therefore, he didn't slaughter, so it doesn't trigger the fourfold or fivefold payment. That's Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 7. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that if two witnesses testify about the theft of an animal and two others testify about its slaughter or sale, the thief pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. And the Gemara suggests, let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. In his exposition of the verse from Deuteronomy 19:15, based on the testimony of two witnesses or on the testimony of three witnesses, shall a matter be established. So how does that violate what Rabbi Akiva said? We don't know what he said yet. What he says is going to be based on this verse from the Torah. So now the Gemara explains, as if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the thief would be exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. Why? Because doesn't Rabbi Akiva say that this verse from the Torah teaches that witnesses' testimony must refer to an entire matter and not part of a matter. In other words, you're going to need the same two witnesses to see that the guy stole the animal and that he later slaughtered the animal or sold the animal. If you got two different pairs of witnesses, one for the theft and one for the slaughter, you don't have two witnesses to the whole matter that triggers the fourfold or fivefold payment. As it is taught in the Tosefta in Bava Basra 2:4, that Rabbi Yosei said, when Father Chalafta went to study Torah with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and some say that he said when Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri went to study Torah with Father Chalafta, now we're on 70b, he said to him the following in the course of their discussion of the halachas of possession. If one has been in possession of real estate for 3 years, this serves as proof of his claim that he is the legal owner. One who is able to prove uninterrupted possession for the necessary period is not required to produce documentary evidence of his legal title to the property. Now, especially that makes sense, in the ancient world where, you didn't have the county recorder of all the deeds and titles of every piece of property within the county, right? It was a much less document-heavy culture that existed 2,000 years ago. So, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, or Father Chalafta, asked, if one harvested and ate the produce of a field that he claims as his own, the first year of the 3 years required for establishing possession of the land in the presence of two witnesses, and subsequently he ate the produce of the second year in the presence of two other witnesses, and finally he ate the produce of the third year in the presence of yet two other witnesses, then what is the law? Can the three testimonies combine to establish a full testimony that this person ate the produce of his field 3 years in a row, thereby confirming that he is the owner of that field, even though he doesn't have a document that stands as the title of that field? And Rabbi Chalafta said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, or vice versa, this is considered to establish presumptive ownership by the one who ate the produce. And the other sage said to him, I too say that this is so. But Rabbi Akiva disputes this matter. As Rabbi Akiva would say, the Torah requires that witnesses must testify with regard to a complete matter and not part of a matter. And since there must be testimony concerning consumption of the produce over 3 years, and each set of witnesses establishes only that it took place for 1 year, so their separate testimonies do not combine, according to Rabbi Akiva. So if so, the Mishna is apparently not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Right? Since Rabbi Akiva would seem, at least per the discussion of Yochanan ben Nuri and Father Chalafta, their understanding of what Rabbi Akiva would say is that if two witnesses saw a guy steal it and a different pair of witnesses saw the guy sell it, since no pair of witnesses can testify as to the whole set of elements that trigger the fourfold payment, namely stealing it and slaughtering it, or stealing it and selling it, so we're not going to trigger the fourfold or fivefold payment, according to Rabbi Akiva. Now, our Mishna says that you do that. You can trigger the fourfold or fivefold payment, even if the witnesses are separated, two sets of witnesses. So what they're saying is, so it seems like our Mishna is not in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, which, if it was any other sage, maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. But Rabbi Akiva, the law is usually according to Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara rejects this assertion. It rejects the idea that our Mishnah is not in accordance with Rabbi Akiva. Abaye said, you can even say that our Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't Rabbi Akiva concede that in a case where two witnesses say, so-and-so betrothed a certain woman, and two other witnesses say, someone else subsequently engaged in sexual intercourse with that same woman, that this is proof that the act of intercourse constituted adultery? Right? Do we have to say that with the same two witnesses that witnessed the betrothal of this couple are those same two witnesses that witnessed her committing adultery with some other guy? We don't say that. Rabbi Akiva would concede that. So when you're saying that, when Rabbi Akiva says that a matter has to be established by two witnesses and not a part of a matter, well, how are we going to define a matter and part of a matter? Maybe it's a matter that this guy slaughtered something that didn't belong to him. We established that it didn't belong to him because of those other two witnesses. But the matter of slaughtering it and then triggering the fourfold or fivefold payment is a complete matter, right? I think that's what they're going to say. Now, the reason for this is that even though the witnesses testified about, now going back to the woman who was betrothed to one man and then had intercourse with someone else and thereby committed adultery. So the reason for this is that even though the witnesses testifying about the intercourse require the witnesses who testify about the betrothal, i.e. the testimony of the second set of witnesses, is meaningless without the testimony of the first witnesses that established the betrothal. Nevertheless, since the witnesses testifying about the betrothal do not require the witnesses who testify about the adultery in order for their evidence to be valid, right? Doesn't matter what she did later, they witnessed the betrothal. So they don't need the other witnesses to be part of their matter, which is just testifying about the betrothal. So therefore, we call the testimony of each pair a complete matter. It's a complete matter to say she was betrothed, and it's a complete matter to say that she slept with somebody who is not her husband. Here, too, the same logic applies in the case of a thief who steals an animal and subsequently slaughters it or sells it. Even though the witnesses who testify about the slaughter require the testimony of the witnesses about the theft in order for their testimony to have any halachic significance, since the witnesses testifying about the theft do not require the testimony of the witnesses who testify about the slaughter, as their testimony alone establishes that the person is a thief who is liable to pay the double payment, so we call the testimony of each pair a complete matter. And the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of the rabbis, who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, that the Torah stipulates that testimony must be about a matter and not half of a matter, so the term matter in Deuteronomy 19:15 serves to exclude what? Right? Rabbi Akiva said that word matter excludes half a matter. Okay, well, the sages the majority who disagree and overruled Rabbi Akiva, they don't have this issue that Rabbi Akiva said. So what do they do with the word matter? And the Gemara answers, they say that this word matter serves to exclude a case involving testimony that a girl has reached majority, in which one witness says that he saw that she had the signs of adulthood in terms of hair, and one witness says that he saw this hair in a place that is not a sign of adulthood. So a girl is considered to have reached maturity when she has two of these hairs, and in this case, two witnesses separately testify that they have each seen one hair, and therefore each testimony is halakhically meaningless on its own. And the rabbis derive from the verse that these testimonies do not combine. So the Gemara raises a difficulty. In this case, each testimony is obviously invalid, as it is half a matter and also half a testimony. Not only does each testimony refer to only one of the hairs, which is half a matter, but it is submitted by one witness, which is half a testimony. Consequently, it is obvious that the girl is not considered to be an adult in this case. So the Gemara therefore rejects this explanation. Rather, the rabbis maintain that the term matter serves to exclude a case in which two witnesses say that they saw one hair on the girl's back and two other witnesses say they saw one hair on her abdomen. So in this case, the testimony of either of the witnesses concerns only one hair, and therefore these witnesses are essentially saying that she is still a minor, and those witnesses are saying that she is still a minor. Therefore, each testimony concerns only half a matter. And that's where they left it. Now, that's where they left it. Now, the Mishna, getting back to our Mishna, where the two witnesses of the theft and the two witnesses of the slaughter do combine to trigger the fourfold payment. So the Mishna teaches, if one stole, now we're going back to the next case in our Mishna. If one stole an animal and sold it on Shabbos, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that in this case he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment? Rami Bar Kamma said, when it is taught in that Baraisa that he is exempt, This is referring to a case where the purchaser says to the thief, pick off a fig for yourself from my fig tree on Shabbos, and through performing this act, your stolen animal shall be acquired by me. Since the act of acquisition of the animal involved the type of Shabbos desecration for which one is liable to receive the death penalty, right? If you violate Shabbos, desecrating Shabbos is technically one becomes liable to the death penalty. Obviously, it's never enforced for a number of reasons, but technically, it is a death penalty offense to desecrate Shabbos. So what this guy is saying is, okay, I'm selling you an animal, and you have to have a formal act of acquisition. So rather than pulling the animal, you could just take a fig from my tree, and we're going to say that acts as a formal act of acquisition. But picking a fig off a tree is prohibited on Shabbos. So can you use a prohibited action to trigger a change of possession in a contractual sense? That's the question that this is debating. So since the act of acquisition of the animal involved a type of Shabbos desecration for which one is liable to receive the death penalty, the thief is exempt from the monetary obligations he would ordinarily incur from this act, i.e. the fourfold or fivefold payment to the animal's prior owner. And this is in accordance with the principle that one who commits two or more transgressions by means of a single act, both of which entail punishment, is exempt from the lesser punishment. So if he's liable to the death penalty, he's not liable to the fourfold payment. And the sages say, questioning this explanation of the Baraisa, but since if the purchaser would bring a legal claim against the thief before us to force him to deliver the animal acquired by means of picking the fig, the court would not say to the thief, go and pay him the animal you owe him, because the thief is liable to receive the death penalty for his desecration of Shabbos. And this shows that the sale is not a valid sale at all. Therefore, the Baraisa would not call this exchange a sale, and this interpretation of the Baraisa cannot be correct. Rather, Rav Papa said the Baraisa is discussing a case where the purchaser said to the thief, throw your stolen animal from the public domain into my enclosed courtyard, and your stolen animal will thereby be acquired by me. Okay, so what they're talking about is that the thief stole an animal, and now he's selling it. But what's going to be the manner of selling it? Is the act of selling, which is normally just, here, take the animal, give me the money, right? But so there's no death penalty offense. But if we can, make strange circumstances where the act of performing the sale violates Shabbos, then we might trigger this problem where the death penalty overrides, and therefore he becomes exempt from the fourfold penalty. Right? So, rather, Rav Papa said, the Bryce is discussing a case where the purchaser said to the thief, right? The purchaser he's going to buy the stolen animal from the thief. Throw your stolen animal from the public domain into my enclosed courtyard, and your stolen animal will thereby be acquired by me, right? Because giving money doesn't affect acquisition. What affects acquisition is that the animal is placed in his courtyard. But when he's saying throw it, what he's doing is he's going to transfer an object from the public domain into the private domain on Shabbos, right? And that's going to violate Shabbos. So one can acquire an item if it is placed on his property. In this case, when the thief places the animal on the purchaser's property, he moves it from the public domain into the private domain, which is a desecration of Shabbos that entails the death penalty. Consequently, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. Right? Why is the death penalty never given? Because you have to say to this guy, hey, if you put that sheep, take it off the road and put it in that courtyard on Shabbos, that's a death penalty offense. And then the guy has to do it immediately after having received the warning. And there have to be witnesses to both the warning and the act. Then he would technically be liable to the death penalty, and only then, and they would still find a way not to do it because they're just not going to give a death penalty for that. But we need to understand how the law actually functions. Now the Gemara asks, if this is the correct explanation of the Baraisa, in accordance with whose opinion I'm sorry. You say you have to tell him that it's illegal to do that on Shabbos, and if you do it, you're going to be liable to the death penalty, and then he does it anyway, right? So that's further requirements, and still it wouldn't happen. Anyway, the Gemara asks, if this is the correct explanation of the Baraisa, in accordance with whose opinion is the Baraisa taught? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says an item in the airspace of a certain area is considered as though it were at rest in the area. As if the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, who hold that an item in the airspace of a certain area is not considered as though it were at rest in that area. Once the animal reaches the airspace of the courtyard of the purchaser's house, he has acquired it, as one can acquire items that are in the airspace of his courtyard, just like those on its ground. Whereas, with regard to moving an item from one domain to another on Shabbos, the thief is not liable for Shabbos desecration until it reaches the ground. Since the thief's monetary liability is not simultaneous with his incurring of the death penalty, he would not be exempt from payment, right? Because it was not the same act. The act that got him the death penalty is throwing it into the airspace above the courtyard. That's already violating Shabbos. When the animal hits the ground is when the sale would be effected. So those are different moments in time. Therefore, he could be subject to both the death penalty and the fourfold payment because they weren't triggered at the exact same moment. And the Gemara answers, well, it is possible that the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis as well, as one can explain that it is speaking of a case in which the purchaser says to the thief, your stolen animal shall not be acquired by me until it rests on the ground. So in that case, the acquisition of the animal and the Shabbos desecration are simultaneous. So Rava said, actually, it is possible to explain the Baraisa as Rami bar Chama did, that the animal was acquired through the picking of a fig on Shabbos. And the objection raised earlier that this act should not be considered a sale at all is incorrect. And this can be demonstrated by the fact that the Torah prohibits one to bring as an offering an animal given as the payment to a prostitute for services rendered at Deuteronomy 23:19. Right? You cannot use money that was paid to a prostitute, the hire of a harlot, or the wages of a harlot, or the payment of a dog, cannot be used to pay for an offering, right? Deuteronomy 23:19. And this prohibition applies even if the man in question engaged in intercourse with his own mother, which is a capital offense. But if she would bring a legal claim before us demanding the payment of the animal that was agreed upon as her fee, that his mother is the hooker and he had sex with her, so that's a capital offense of incest. But the other issue is that he's paying her for the act. But if she would bring a legal claim before us demanding the payment of the animal that was agreed upon as her fee, would we say to him, arise and pay her the animal? The court would not say this, as the monetary liability was incurred simultaneously with the commission of the capital crime of incest. Rather, one must say that even though if she brings a legal claim against him demanding the payment of the animal that was agreed upon as her fee, and I'm almost done, so questions or comments, please get them in. That even though if she brings a legal claim against him demanding the payment of the animal that was agreed upon as her fee, we do not say to him, go and pay her. Nevertheless, since if he does give it to her, it is considered payment to a prostitute, it cannot be used as an offering. So here too, in the case of the acquisition of the animal through picking a fig, even though with regard to payment, if the purchaser would bring a legal claim before us against the thief, seeking to force him to deliver the animal, we would not say to him, go pay. And even so, since the thief transfers ownership to the purchaser in this manner, it is considered a valid sale, and he is required to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. So we're clearly in that realm of hypothetical cases that they're dreaming up, crazy cases, just in order to test the law, right? So the first thing we tested was, can it be that two witnesses established that he stole something and a different pair of witnesses established that he slaughtered it? Yes, we can combine those two testimonies to say he has to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. And then the second matter was testing the Mishna's statement that if he stole it and then he slaughtered on Shabbos, right, which is a death penalty offense, nevertheless, he would be liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, I guess because... I'm not sure why, right? Because the slaughter there, that's a simpler case that I just named than the crazy cases that they were naming, right? But if you slaughter on Shabbos, well, first of all, if you slaughter on Shabbos, right, and you're not warned, so then it's not going to be a death penalty offense. Now, technically it is a death penalty offense, you just wouldn't get the death penalty. So maybe the fact that it simply is a death penalty offense should override the fourfold or fivefold penalty. But I guess they made the case that it wouldn't override, and you still would have to make it, right? Is that what the Mishna said? Let me just double check. Now I've confused myself. Just to reread the Mishnah, if one stole an animal and sold it on Shabbos, or if he stole it and sold it for idol worship, etc., or he slaughtered it on Yom Kippur, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. So even though that could be a death penalty offense, he still pays it, and they're explaining why. Okay. Let's take a couple questions. Jonathan, from prior pages, I was confused by the fifth part, meaning the 20% surcharge or fine. I thought I read it was actually adding 25% in that they added one part for every four, and that was the fifth part. Yeah, so that is a discussion that comes up often, when we're talking about money issues in the Talmud. Where there's some kind of a penalty or a fine. It also comes up, for example, that if a sale happened between a purchaser and a seller, and there was a overcharge or an undercharge of more than 1/6 of what the market price should be, then we can invalidate the sale. But if the error was less than 1/6, we don't. So are we measuring 1/6 of the final price that was paid, which let's say was an overcharge, or are we saying 1/6 of the initial? And so this is called the inner or outer fraction, right? So the fifth, is it 1/5 of the final price that was paid, which would be 25% of the initial value, right? If you add a quarter, you're going to end up with 5 equal parts, right? And so it's a fifth of the final, but you got there by establishing a quarter of the initial. So that kind of question comes up a lot. Marjorie, with regard to the word Wiebelfetzer, is compliments of Rebbitzin Greenbaum, my Avos Brooklyn neighbor, who was my good friend from the time I was born in my grandmother's basement. Don't know if the word is Yiddish or German. Thank you, Marjorie. That's a great word to learn. Wiebelfetzer. That's great. I guess just a doodad that you keep around because it might be useful, and then it turns out to be useful. Sharon, didn't the Pious Ones allow consecration of stolen fruit because it was potentially poor people who took the fruit for food, and it released them from the sin of eating prohibited fruit? Or did I misunderstand it? Yeah, it was a different case. In terms of the poor ones, that's because they might have taken more than the gleanings that were legally entitled to take because of that mitzvah of leaving the gleanings for the poor. When we were talking about the pious ones with regard to fourth year fruit, they were doing it for the benefit of just people walking by, not necessarily the poor, but rather just people who walked by and took a grape off the vine and didn't know that they would be eating prohibited food because it was fourth year fruit. And that's what I've got for us today. So with God's help, we will be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time of noon Pacific. Have a great night.